how they work in general, then how to appoint patients' requests so that they have small waiting times and so on. And on the other hand, we had the patient transportation when they get an appointment, how to get to the specific ward within the hospital, for instance. And this was all about costs. And now we start with operating room planning. This is actually where the real profit comes in. Okay, this is where hospitals are generating real profits. Okay, so we're not trying to decrease waiting time, of course, also, but not. This is not a priority, let's say. We don't have this cost perspective, but in operating room planning, there's a lot of profit. Okay, so this is a brief overview of the operating room planning. So we have a brief introduction, and then we use the bin packing problem from the operation research. This is always the case when we try to use some kind of known techniques and use them for the healthcare setting to improve our planning. And then we have some robust surgery loading to hedge against uncertainties, and then at the end sequence elective surgeries. Electives are those who have already an appointment. Okay. So I will go briefly through the introduction because the slides are anyway self-explanatory. Okay. So here in 2020, so 4 years ago, there was this article which discussed significant renovation project at the Vincius Hospital in Landau, Germany. It's not far away from here. And the project involves the construction of an absolutely new operating tract, recovery rooms, expanded intensive care unit. So the total investment covered 30 million. So it's always a really huge thing when they expand their operating rooms. And the question is always, how many rooms do you need? Okay, so huge hospitals have often between 16 and 28 operating rooms. They are pretty expensive, but as I said, this is where the money comes in. Okay, and operating rooms are often the bottleneck. Okay, so every specialty, oncology, pediatric, and so on, they all want to have these operating rooms, operating hours, because of the involved money. Okay, so they would like to reserve as much time in the operating rooms as possible. Okay, looking at the statistics, and 2 years ago we had 17 million inpatients, and of them, almost all of them, so 60 million surgeries were performed. So all of the inpatients mean that they are staying overnight, and almost all of them had some kind of surgery. Okay, and there are these critical and expensive resources, okay, but at the same time also the largest source of revenue. Okay, and this is basically the bottleneck. Okay, and the question is which patient goes to which room. So for instance, some patients require special equipment, and we have to schedule and sequence in the patients. So often complicated cases are put in first, but of course also with the complicated cases we have a high level of variation. Okay, often the complicated cases might take longer than expected. Okay, then we have to differentiate between the planning levels. We could have a strategic or long-term planning. So these are general decisions concerning the size of the department, so the number of inpatient, outpatient, operating rooms, and so on. And of course, if we have a particular number of emergency rooms and operating rooms, we also have to define the staff. Which kind of employees do we need? What kind of skills? How many of them? And so on. Okay, so the definition is based on spatial and temporal capacity. Okay, and then on a medium-term level, or the tactical planning, so this is often done for a week. Every specialty, as I said, radiology, pediatric, oncology, and so on, they all want in a hospital to get their operating time. Okay, But the problem is that everyone wants to have as much as possible. Okay, so you see here on Monday the nose thread ward gets the time from between 40 and from 10 to 5 p.m. So just orthopedics in the morning on Tuesdays and so on. So the basic task is the allocation of capacity to these specialties, and they all compete with each other. And then on a short-term level, the operational planning, this is the creation of robust surgical schedules for the next few days. So it's not for the weeks, but on days. And if you know all your demand, for instance, for the elective surgeries, where you call the doctors, where you call the hospital and you get an appointment assigned, then you are elective patient, and this is called operation offline. So this is the offline. So the demand for the surgeries are known because of these electives. And during the surgery day, okay, so we know all the plans are crap at the end of the day, because we have, of course, take emergencies into account, okay, and we don't know the current future, the upcoming future, and that means we have to also to reschedule, and this is then the online planning. Okay, so if we have some kind of emergencies, delays in our planning, so we have to readjust it. Okay, and also the goals, not only the planning, but also the goals depend on the long-term, medium, and short-term perspective. We have the long-term planning, the required amount of ORs, assign, of course, the capacity and also the staff. And from the beginning, we know the case mix planning, so how many patients do we want to, or what kind do we want to have in our hospitals. And if you consider Lauterbach strategy, you can earn more money if you are a specialized hospital, because he wants to have more specialized hospitals. And if you want to count as a specialized hospital, then you need a minimum number of particular surgeries per year. Okay. Then we have the medium-term goals to minimize costs. So we would like to have high utilization and well-balanced utilization throughout our operation rooms within the week. And the main goal is we don't want that our operating rooms are idle. Okay, so we don't want to have waiting times, unused equipment, stuff that is not working and so on. So we would like to avoid that. And on the short term, we also want to minimize costs, but this also considers we don't want to work overtime that much, and we would like to reduce waiting and idle times between the surgeries. Okay, and this is might not be measured quantitatively, but we want to maximize service level. So of course that includes patient satisfaction, but also how punctual are we, and how long is the patient in our operating room and in our hospital. We would also like to decrease that. Okay, and of course these objectives could be conflicting. Okay, so this has to be done considering, for instance, assigning time slots. Do we want to have them in the morning, afternoon, all day? On a long term, in a medium, we also would like to respect the desired appointment times of the patient. We have to respect the urgency of the surgeries, but because not all surgeries are emergencies, okay, and not that urgent, because hip surgery can wait, plastic surgery can even wait longer, and so on. And then we have the short-term perspective. Okay, then on the respected day, we have to consider: do we have enough resources, enough equipment, enough staff, enough rooms, and also what kind of surgery do we have to prioritize? Okay. And of course, if we would like to improve and optimize our operating room planning, we have to consider different interfaces. So first of all, we have this hospital information system, HIS, where all the patient data is stored, and that has to be available for the surgeon. Yeah. That was an extreme example, but if you look at mental health issues, that could be connected with plastic surgeries, or if you have some kind of accident with fire or whatever, then you also need this in a hospital. It's not the common thing, right? But yeah, to have an extreme example. Exactly. And the interesting thing about the patient master data, so where all the patient data is stored, on one hand, it's extremely confidential, so if it gets in the wrong hands, it can be misused, and is said that patient health data is more worth on the dark net than financial data. This is because you can steal an entire identity, and you can do a business with that, basically. Because if financial information is lost, then you call your bank and cancel the number and so on, but you cannot cancel the entire health history of a patient. Okay, so identity theft is pretty common on a dark web. So the problem is this data has to be very, very confidential and secured, but on the other hand, it has to be available at every time for the surgeon, for the staff, for the insurance, but also for the patients. Okay, so to find the right balance is really difficult. And on the other hand, if we plan operating rooms, of course, we have to keep staff in mind. So what are the principal shifts of our staff? Then materials, logistics, pharmacy, what kind of material do we need during our operations? And also the transport service, when has the patient be there in the pre-surgery ward? Okay, so we need punctual transportation. We had that before. Okay, and the general management consists of performance management, capacity management, and administration. Administration is clear, it's pretty boring, documentation of performance and cost control and transparency. Capacity management consists of, do we have enough material and do we have enough staff to do the operating and to do the surgeries? And then on the left-hand side, we have the performance measurements, so how to measure how good the surgeries are, what kind of quality control do we have. These are laws of how to report quality. So one measurement is, for instance, the surgery duration, okay, and this has to be reported also on a daily basis. And we had also this before, we could have several reasons for delays. Of course, delayed arrival of patients or surgeons. Often, or some hospitals try to buy some kind of software from automotive industry, and what they didn't take into account is the late arrival of patients, because in the automotive industry, the cars are there. So the input is there, so they don't have to deal with that. If you buy the software and try to implement it one by one simply to our hospital, that won't work, okay? Because in a hospital, we have different characteristics. For instance, the late arrival of patients within the campus. And we had that also before, but also surgeons could be delayed because they the previous surgery took longer than expected and they are too late for this one. Lack of staff, last minute changes, delayed surgery start in the morning. We had that also because of morning rounds and so on. Long change over time between the surgeries because sometimes you need some kind of setup, cleaning, then setting up the next surgery. They might need different equipment and so on. Could be also that we have a lack of equipment and also unrealistic surgery schedule, which also is pretty common in reality. Okay, and they have to deal with that because often those who are doing the schedules, they don't have a clue about the real surgery. Okay, they say, okay, rule of thumb, it will take 60 minutes, but in real life, they need 120 minutes or 30, whatever, okay? So often there's this kind of mismatch. Okay, then, as I said before, we also have to differentiate, as Sven said, also if we have an emergency call, not every patient has the same urgency, okay? And this is the same for surgeries. Of course, we could have the emergencies, so we have to start the surgery without any delay. Then we have urgent treatment that could wait for a given period of time, maybe 1 day. And then we have these elective surgeries, hip, knee surgery, for instance. Here it's at least 24 hours in advance, but often it's, if you call and you would like to have this hip surgery, the standard surgeries, you have to wait for weeks and sometimes even for months. Okay, so for 24 hours it's really, really fast. Okay, and then we have a very simple process of surgeries. Of course, you have this kind of pre-operative inward transfer. You start with the anesthesia, then putting the patient on the bed. Then the real surgery takes place. Then the patient gets back to their own bed, end of anesthesia, and then you have some kind of post-operative outward transfer to the recovery room. Or if the surgery was a difficult one, it could be that the patient is transferred to the intensive care unit, okay, because they need special treatment. Okay, and then we have, of course, different objectives. We would like to minimize costs, but on the other hand, maximize utilization. We don't want to have operating rooms that are idle, and we also would like to maximize quality of care and to satisfy patients. And of course, we have these conflicting performance criteria. Okay, we have overtime for personnel. We could have cancellation of surgeries and long waiting times for urgent or even emergency patients. Okay, we want to overcome this. And the decision making is pretty complex. We have different patients, we have different operating rooms capacities, but we also have an impact on other departments. Okay, because if the surgery went not that well, they need this. They need special treatment. So, but they are very expensive. Intensive care units, especially beds, are pretty expensive and requires nurses. Okay, and then we have different people that are involved, patients, surgeons, and so on. We have to take them also into account. And of course, at the end of the day, we have a high level of uncertainty. Okay. So we will focus in the following on short-term planning. That means on a daily basis. And here we would like to use bin packing. So bin packing problems are pretty classic combinatorial optimization problems. And they try to pack objects of different volumes, of different weights into a finite number of bins. And these bins have fixed capacities. And the goal is to minimize the number of bins. So if you go shopping and you have your bags, you would like to use few bags, okay? So that means we want to have as few operating rooms as possible. Okay, so this is our goal. Okay, so the problem we have to solve is which surgeries are assigned to which operating rooms. Okay, so we consider two cases. Again, the offline problem where we all know the demand for surgeries. They are coming from the elective patients. Okay, so available capacity, this means the hours per operating room and day. And they can be reduced also to anticipate emergency. Okay, so I know I have 100% operating room capacity and I plan just for 50%. The remaining 50% are just for emergency patients. Okay, so to hedge somehow against this uncertainty. And then we consider emergency surgeries to an online problem where the emergency are coming in and we have to reschedule our plan. And the objective is to maximize capacity utilization. And we use the bin packing. problem. So we have M bins. In our case, these are our operating rooms with a capacity of operating hours Bj. Okay. And then we would like to assign n items. In our case, these are surgeries, S with a length of ai to these operating rooms. Okay. And of course, the length of a surgery shouldn't exceed the overall capacity of this operating room. It makes otherwise no sense. We won't have a feasible solution otherwise. Okay, and the objective is now to minimize the number of used bins. Okay, so before we said we would like to maximize the utilization. So why do we have now the minimized number of used operating rooms? Why is it the same? So before we would like to, we said we would like to maximize utilization, and now we say we would like to minimize the number of operating rooms. So why is this the same? Why can we formulate it like this? And saying, okay, our objective is now to minimize the number of used operating rooms. We would like to open as few operating rooms as possible. Why is this the same as maximizing utilization? Exactly. So we have one room that is much more packed in some sense, so the bin is more packed. So if you plan with 4 instead of 5 operating rooms, of course there are more surgeries in this room, and the utilization is then higher of this operating room. Okay, and to get really feasible solution, we assume that the number of bins, the number of operating rooms is at least the number of surgeries. Okay, so otherwise we would run into some numerical issues. Okay, so let's start with the offline optimization, which means we all know the surgery demand. Okay, so we know the inputs, we all know the elective surgeries, okay, before we start the optimization. And the output is also generated offline, so we don't include any kind of new information. So that means the algorithm itself is an offline algorithm. So it gets as an input a sequence of surgeries, and then it assigns these surgeries to maybe room 1 and room 2. Okay, so this is basically the offline algorithm, and the bin packing is as following. So we have the decision variables yj, so it's 1 if the operating room j is used, otherwise it's 0, and xij means that 1 if item, so if surgery I is assigned to this operating room, okay, 0 otherwise. And the objective function, as I said, is to minimize the number of used operating rooms, which a pretty simple objective function is simply to count the ones. Okay, so to count the numbers of open operating rooms. As soon as y is 1, it counts. Okay, so we want to minimize the number of open operating rooms. And the constraint is that we cannot assign the same surgery for more than one operating room. Okay, this is here. So for every surgery I, we have to respect this constraint. Okay, we have to choose one operating room for that. And then we have the operating room capacity cannot be exceeded. So if we don't open the operating room J, so Y is 0, then of course we cannot assign any kind. So if the right hand side is 0, we cannot assign anything on the left hand side, and this is also 0. If the operating room is 1, it's open, then it has some kind of, let's say, 8 hours of operating time. This is the capacity. And every surgery I has a particular number of, or a particular duration. So nose operation takes 3 hours, and then hip operation takes 5 hours, and so on. So, but the sum overall cannot exceed these 8 hours on the right hand side. Questions so far? Okay. And of course, both decision variables are binary, 0 or 1. Okay, so how to solve that? Even although this is, if you look at that, this is a pretty simple optimization model. It's a pretty simple objective function, just two constraints. And even for this case, this is already an NP-hard problem. So that means we would like to use some kind of heuristic, and we can use the first fit decreasing and best fit decreasing algorithm. So the first one is we sort the items in order of decreasing size, and that means if we sort them in a decreasing order, then that means the largest items are placed first into your bag, okay, or into your operating room. And this helps basically to reduce the number of bins, because we assume that larger items are harder to fit, and placing them first minimizes simply the risk of not being able to fit them later into your operating room. So it tries to fit each item into the first bin that has enough capacity, so to ensure that this is basically a very straightforward and quick assignment process. Okay, and the best fit is the same, so we sort the items in the decreasing order. And the idea of the best fit is if you can fill an operating room to 100%, this would be your optimal solution. Okay, so we don't have any kind of idle times. Okay, so you exactly with this algorithm, you want to fill the bin as much as possible. So you want to come close to this 100%. So therefore, it looks for the bin that will be the most tightly packed. Okay, after placing the item, and this also tries to minimize the remaining space in the bin. So let's maybe have an example, so to see the difference between both. So let's assume you have here a bin. So this is your operating room. The first one, so it's already 60% full. Okay, then you have a second operating room. Okay, this is let's say 30% filled, and then you have a third one, which is 40% filled. Okay, and then you have to assign a new surgery that needs 50% of your capacity. Okay, so you cannot place it in the first bin anymore. So using the first fit, what would you choose, the second or the third room? Yeah, the second one, exactly. So that would mean we get a solution. This would be the first fit decreasing. Okay, so we 50 plus 30, so we have 80%. Okay, yeah. And this one is still filled with 40%. Okay, and what about if we use the best fit decreasing? I cannot move that. I hope you can see that. So which one would you choose? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because so the second one is still 30%. But the third one we can fill now with 90%, okay? So we choose the bin or the operating room where the capacity, left capacity is minimized. Okay, so we want to pack it as full as possible so that we reach the 100% here. Okay, so this is the basic idea. The question is always when we deal with heuristics is we never know how good the heuristic is. Okay, we get a fast, good quality solution, but we never know how near is it to the optimal solution. Okay, but it's very important to understand how good is the heuristic. Okay, should we use that, or is it really better simply to do that manually? Okay, and so the idea is to compare the objective value of our heuristic, of our offline heuristic, CA, with the optimal solution. Okay, and here we have this upper bound for the worst cases. So the heuristic solution, okay, provided is at most C times worse than the optimal solution. So if the optimal solution will give us 10 operating rooms, that would be optimal, and your quality of the heuristic is, let's say, 2, that would mean that you, if you use the heuristic, in the worst case, they will give you 20 as a result, okay? Which is not really good, okay, to have C is 2, because it's double as worse, okay? So instead of 2, which would be optimal, the heuristic will give you 20. Okay, and C, this constant C, is then the quality of the heuristic. And what could be shown is that for the first fit and also for the best fit, both lead to a quality of 1.5. Okay, so that means both have the same quality, okay, and the solutions provided by the FFD and BFD, they are at most, bless you, are at most 1.5 times worse than the optimal solution. And you have here the big O notation that describes the upper bound of the time complexity the heuristic would need. And in our case, this means that with increasing input size, it will increase linearly, and then we also have this logarithmic factor also. Okay, so the problem here, so which is really expensive, is actually the sorting part of the algorithm, and the other things are pretty easy. Okay, so and then we come to the online optimization. So that means if we don't know the future, okay, and the emergencies are coming in, okay, so we process the request in order of their arrival. Okay, so we don't know the future, and the output is generated online. So we generate the output continuously as soon as we receive input data. Okay, we don't have any information about the future, and this is an online algorithm, which means we get a request, we assign it. We get a second, we assign it. We get a third one, we assign it to the first operating room, and then the next one is assigned simply to the second operating room over here. Okay, so patients' requests are coming time by time. And we have different examples from the industry, elevator control. Pretty common is the PC cache management, but, and that's good thing is we can also use it for the assignment of emergency to our operating rooms, okay? Because we simply don't know our future requests. Okay, and the same for the online algorithm, we also have to understand the quality of it. The basic idea is the same. We compare the offline, so the algorithm, the online algorithm, with the optimal offline algorithm, which means what if we would know everything, okay? If we would know the demand beforehand, then compare that, okay? And the online algorithm is then compared to the strongest adversary. So the optimal offline algorithm has full knowledge of all future events and then can provide the best possible solution, and then is compared to this hardest competitor, let's say, and that generates the worst possible input sequence simply to challenge the online algorithm, okay? And this helps us again to understand the worst case performance. And we have to take into account that these worst case performances are often not visible in the real life. So often, on average, it's much better than these worst case analysis. But still, we should understand that in some cases, if we have really bad data, and I don't talk about bad quality data, I mean if the sequence of the input data is really worse for the algorithm, then it could happen that it will give us the worst case result. And so the worst case bound also here counts, but this time C is not the quality, but the competitiveness of the online algorithm. So how good is it compared to the best offline algorithm. Okay, and because especially for big and huge problems, we don't know the optimal solution, also not for the offline algorithm. Here then simulation can help, because often we cannot check the quality. Okay, there's no reference point. So we run many tests to have some kind of a steady state at the end to compare that with different online algorithms. Okay, it's a simple comparison, because we don't have this optimal solution we can compare with. Okay. And a heuristic that we could use for the online bin packing problem is items are assigned to bins, one after another, okay, from 1 to n, so we don't know the sequence yet. Okay, so as soon as one request comes in, we have to assign it. Okay, so that means here there's no sorting available. We cannot sort these requests. We just simply have to take as soon as they come in. Okay, and the question is how many of, at least what kind of items will appear is unknown. And we could use the next fit. We knew it from the patient transportation. We have one active operating room. Okay, so if the incoming surgery eye fits into the active operating room, so we have enough capacity, then assign this to the operating room. Okay, so if it comes in, so 50%, our operating room is already full with 60%, we simply go to the second. Open a new one, open a new operating room, and place it simply in the next operating room. Okay, so this is the easiest way. Then first fit, and this is the same as the decreasing algorithm. So we assume all operating rooms are now open, and we assign to the first operating that fits. Okay, we have 50%, and this is the same as the first fit decreasing. We simply put it into the first operating room. Okay, and the best fit, again, all operating rooms are open, and the next surgery is assigned to the operation room, which has the least remaining capacity after the assignment. So the same as the best fit here. So we would like to minimize left capacity. So we would like to try to pack one operating room as much as possible before open a new room. Okay. Okay. Let's have a look at an example. So let's assume we have 3 bins, 3 operating rooms. Every bin has capacity of 3. So we could have 3. Yeah, let's keep it in bins, so it's maybe easier. So every bin has a capacity of 3, and now the sequence comes in first 1, 1, 2, 3, 2. So we have n items that we would like to assign, but we don't know the order yet. Okay, so this would be, if we look at the sequence, if we would know that in advance, the sequence, we could easily determine the optimal solution. Of course, we would then put the 2 and 1 in one bin, 2 and 1, and so we have full capacity exploitation, and also here full utilization for the second, and the third one, and the 1, 2, 3. The fourth request is assigned to the third bin, okay, and it fills the bin 100%. So the optimal solution to open 3 bins, okay, open 3 operating rooms. If we would use the next fit, that would mean the first is coming in, it is placed to the first bin. The next surgery is coming in, or the next request is coming in, it requires capacity of 1. It fits still into the first bin, so it is assigned to the first one. Then the second is coming in, so the 2 capacity requests is coming in. It doesn't fit here anymore, so a new bin is opened. Then the next request requires a capacity of 3. Of course, it doesn't fit here anymore, so we open a new bin. And then we have the last request requiring 2 capacities. units, and so we have to open a fourth bin or fourth operating room. And you can see here the quality or the competitiveness is for third if we look at 5 surgeries or 5 requests. Okay, so this is the example. You can see here that this cannot be optimal. Okay, so if we would know that in advance, we could arrange it in an optimal way, but here, if we use NextFit, we cannot do that. Okay, so what is the lower bound of the competitiveness? So how bad could it be? And for similar as for the offline algorithm, also for the online, the bin packing problem, we have C, which is at least 1.5. It doesn't matter which kind of algorithm you are using, okay, and it's absolutely independent of the number of items or the requests we have to assign, okay. And here's a proof based on a numerical example. So let's assume we have a bin with a capacity of 2, and we have a request sequence of 0.9, 0.9, 1.1, and 1.1. We know again that the optimal solution would be to open 2 bins. Okay, this one and this one together is exactly 2, and this one and this one would be 2. So the optimal solution would be to open 2 bins or to open 2 operating rooms. Okay, and each online, so it doesn't matter what kind of algorithm you are using, it will start to place the item 1 in the first bin. Okay, and then afterwards, so 0.9 is placed to the first bin. So this is valid for every algorithm. And then we have 2 possibilities. So either what we can do is to open a new bin and place the second request to that one. Okay. If we would stop here, we would know that actually 1 bin would absolutely enough. Okay. But because we assign it to 2 bins, we have here a solution of 2. That means that our C, our competitiveness, is at least 2. If we would consider the entire sequence, so what we also could do is we could place both first requests to the first bin, okay, and the next one, 1.1, is placed to the second one, but the last request of 1.1 doesn't fit into that one anymore, so we have to open a third bin. Okay, so again, we know that the optimal solution would be 2, okay, but with this algorithm it is 3, and we see here that our competitiveness constant is at least 1.5. Okay, so this is, I mean, if you would like to see the original proof, you can look at this paper that was previously provided. So I will also upload it in Elias, but here you have a numerical example, okay, to show this proof. Okay, and I would like to finish with an example. So let's assume we have a surgeon who works 6 hours per day, okay, and each patient gets assigned a day for the surgery after this examination, and the surgeon estimates the duration. So the first surgery requires 87 minutes. This is at least assumed, 57 minutes, 180, and so on. Okay, and the objective is that he would like to work only few days, so as few days as possible. So that means if we use an online algorithm, that means we take the first 87 minutes surgery, so because we use the NextFit strategy, and we are placing it into the first day. Okay, overall we have 360 minutes of operating time capacity, so he works 6 hours. The next request requires 57 minutes. Okay, we can place it. We can also use the 180-minute surgery, but the next one takes 166 minutes. We cannot assign that anymore to that. Therefore, we open here that new day, and the next days are filled as before. Okay, what can you see here? what is interesting? If you look at this schedule, would you say there's something you could improve, for instance? Yeah. Exactly. Thank you. So what could be is that we simply use, if we would know that before, we could assign the 65 minutes to that one. Okay. So the second day, and then he wouldn't need to open a new day, so he wouldn't need to work on Thursday, for instance. What else? Yeah. For online, sorry. This is an example for online. So the question is here now, why we are shifting it. It's what if we would know it in advance? Then you have some kind of improvement. Right? Not necessary, I will show it in a minute. It seems to be, but we could also arrange it differently. We come to that in a minute, or maybe next week, let's see. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what we can also see here that we could at the end of the day we have this idle times here, okay, and also here, of course. Okay. I think I stop here.